If you're following along in our Bible reading plan, you'll know that Acts 16 was the New Testament portion in our reading today. In Acts 16, Paul picks up a traveling companion to join him on his mission of sharing the good news of Jesus, a fellow named Timothy. But before they set out together, Paul does something that might seem a bit out of character for him. The text tells us that Paul had Timothy circumcised because of the Jews who lived in that area. Now, certainly circumcision had been a big deal to the people of God in Old Testament times. It was a requirement of the covenant God had made with them. It was one of the ways in which they were marked as people that God had set apart for himself. But in Acts, we're in New Testament times now. And Paul seems to be at the front of the line in arguing that circumcision isn't necessary anymore. He teaches that the only circumcision that matters is now the setting apart of one's heart for God. It's not necessary in a bodily fashion. He teaches that in Christ, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision has any value. In fact, Paul goes so far as to say, if you let yourselves be circumcised, Christ will be of no value to you at all. So it seems strange here that the one thing he requires of Timothy before they head off together is he must be circumcised. Well, for Paul, the issue isn't actually whether or not Timothy needs to be circumcised to be acceptable to God. That's not the case whatsoever. For Paul, the issue is 100% about people getting to hear the news of Jesus. And he knew that if the Jewish people who they would cross paths with and who knew Timothy was a Greek, and if they assumed he was uncircumcised, well, they would just get stuck on that one thing, and there would be no opportunity for them to hear the gospel clearly. So Paul's strategy? Do whatever he can to clear the way for the gospel of Jesus to be heard. Paul himself describes this strategy best when he writes to the Corinthians, "Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this all for the sake of the gospel." You see, Paul has no problem agreeing that because of what Christ has done, we have been made free people in so many ways. In fact, Paul's pretty much the champion of the idea of freedom in Christ. But he is also asserting that that isn't the most important thing. That's not the highest value. I am free, Paul says, but if it serves the cause of the gospel for me to voluntarily give up my freedom, I'll do it in a heartbeat. See, for Paul, it's not that freedom isn't important. It's just that ensuring that the story of Jesus gets a clear hearing is even more important. We live in a world in which asserting our freedoms and our rights is a big deal. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But I do think we need to be careful that we don't just blindly let that bleed over into our spiritual lives. When it comes to those who don't know Christ, or even, when it comes to believers who are maybe younger in the faith than we are, what should matter most to us is what mattered most to Paul, that we might be used to help those people gain a clearer image of who Jesus is and what his call on their lives is. That should be our aim in our interpersonal interactions. And so when it comes to freedoms around things like entertainment choices, alcohol, dress, literature, language, maybe even certain spiritual practices, even when those things don't fall outside any ethical or moral boundaries, if it takes us giving up some of those freedoms in a particular moment or in a particular circumstance in order to make sure that the good news of Jesus can get a hearing, well, Paul says that is what we need to do. May God give us the wisdom and clarity to know how we can best live out and speak out the good news of Jesus in an unhindered way.